I just don't think there's the market for it. I don't think people want it. The people who, as I said to you, don't trust my robot Hoover are going to trust a robot car over a taxi. Don't think so.
Welcome to Warning All Stations, the transport podcast. I'm Christian Walmart, an author and journalist who has covered transport for the past 30 years. In every episode, we try to keep you up to date with the most engaging news stories, policy developments, and interviews in the transport world. And with me is my regular co-presenter, Mark Walker, who has spent decades looking at transport policies and legislation. So, Mark, what are we covering today in this new year?
Hello, Christian. Hello to our listeners, and Happy New Year to you and to everybody at home or in your office or your vehicle or wherever you're listening to our podcast. Today, we have an extended interview with Steve McNamara, who's the General Secretary of the Licensed Taxi Drivers Association for Greater London, which covers a vast range of issues in the taxi sector, but particularly concentrates on an issue dear to your heart, Christian, which is the potential impact of autonomous taxis as they are introduced into London in the fairly near future. Later on, continuing our theme of road transport and safety, we'll be looking at the UK government's publication of its road safety policy for Great Britain, and at a related policy announcement on a subject we have covered previously on this podcast, the issue of pavement parking and the impact that has in particular on pedestrians and people with reduced and impaired mobility.
Right, great. Yes, it's we're going to start off with the Steve McNamara interview, but I'll just tell you something he told me off air, which was quite interesting. Which is, I mean, he's as listeners will hear, he's very articulate, and he's done a million media interviews, and he's a great storyteller. And he told me that back in the late 80s, when they were setting up Top Gear, unbeknown to him, they actually interviewed him for the Top Gear presenter job. And he had a couple of interviews, and they didn't actually tell him what it was for. And they got him down to the last three until he got beaten by some guy that we've never heard of since. So listeners will hear that, he's a very articulate and interesting guy.
And here's the interview with Steve McNamara, General Secretary of the Licensed Taxi Drivers Association.
Driverless cars, or indeed robotaxis, are heading for London's streets, apparently, by April or May this year. So I thought we'd catch up on what the existing taxi service thinks about this by having a conversation with Steve McNamara, who is the General Secretary of the Licensed Taxi Drivers Association, and obviously has some strong views about this. But before we go on to that, Steve, can we just sort of have a general picture of what a London taxi trade is like at the moment and how it's been faring in recent years, given that, you've got extra competition for Uber, you've had kind of increase in 20-mile-an-hour zones and all that. So how are you doing?
So business-wise, we're doing very well. I mean, obviously, we're talking here in January. January is always the worst month of the year. In the taxi trade, it's known as the kipper season. Oh. Again, there's one of these sort of black cab things that's lost in the midst of time as to why it's called the kipper season. Some people say that it's flat and you've got to pick the bones out of it. Other people say that back in the 1930s, you could only afford to eat kippers, and no one really knows. But the cab trade folklore.
The second one is probably correct, but yeah,
it's full of these things.
Great stuff.
And so we're sitting. So at the moment, things aren't great, but generally, we're doing very well. In London, we're busier than we've ever been. I've been in this business 40 years. We've never been as busy as we are. You mentioned Uber, but the other apps as well. There's these other private hire apps. Back in 2012, 13, 14, 15, when they were being subsidised by venture capitalists, and their rides were all massively subsidised.
And much cheaper than taxi.
Well, they were ludicrously cheap.
Yeah.
I mean, you could summon a car at 3 o'clock in the morning, for peanuts, and people loved it. It was dirt cheap, and of course with all of those things, there was a very good reason for it. Number one, it was being subsidised, and number two, they weren't following any of the rules and regs that they should have done. You'll remember that when they first arrived, they called themselves disruptors.
Right. Yeah, they like that word.
They did then, they don't anymore. And so what happened as a result of that, eventually they were refused a license in 2017 over a plethora of safety reasons. And they transformed and started to follow more of the regs. Unfortunately, not enough. And they lost their license again in 2019. And since then, there's been a bit of a sea change in their thinking, not just Uber, but all of these apps. They no longer see themselves as disruptors. They recognise that what they are is they're private hire drivers, they're private hire firm, they're minicabs in London parlance. And so therefore, there's rules and regs that they have to follow. And largely now they tend to follow them.
So the prices tend to be similar to yours?
Their prices now are very similar to ours. It varies on the time of day, it varies on the location and the journey you're doing. They've got the advantage over us in whereby they can set their prices by the minute. Our prices are obviously set by the Mayor and Transport for London. So you can't have a situation where you get in a taxi at 1 o'clock this afternoon and it charges you X, and at 1 o'clock tomorrow afternoon it charges you something different.
Right. Yeah.
So the fares are what the fares are. They're set by TfL. So they've got an advantage over us with that. But what they have lost is the subsidies. They've lost the cheap labour that they had. I don't represent Uber drivers, but there's various groups that do, and they're all campaigning constantly. They allege that their drivers are exploited, that their drivers are earning less than minimum wage, and anyone who uses one of these private hire apps, talk to the driver, ask him, don't ask me.
But there's 16,000 licensed cab drivers now, and that's down from about 24, 25,000.
Yeah,
So why is that? If you're doing so well, why is that?
Right. Well, there's several reasons for that. As I said to you, 2014 to really the start of the pandemic, it picked up again about 2020, but we suffered 6-7 years of absolutely dire competing with somebody who wasn't paying any tax in his country, who was all the things I've just told you. And so as we went into the pandemic, things were picking up a bit. And then obviously we had 2 years of the pandemic. So there were 2 years of my members being unemployed. Nobody was at work for 2 years, self-employed. And so many guys gave up licenses. They sold cabs, they scrapped cabs. And then, of course, we come out of the pandemic and London returned in a way, as you'll be aware, that no one thought it would. Everyone thought, the working from home thing was going to stay forever. No one was ever going to go back into offices. And London is just booming,
Yeah, no, it was so depressing. I remember going round during the pandemic to all the London stations one day just for a book I was writing. It was the most depressing experience ever. I thought, would London ever come back? And you're saying it has.
Oh, London's come back with a vengeance. London is busier than it's ever been. People do work from home, but every week, more and more people are back in the office. Lots of these firms now want people in 5 days, 4 days. And it's you've only got to try and get on a train in the morning now or a tube, and you'll see how busy London is.
So you're still getting people doing the knowledge and wanting to become cab drivers?
Right. So what happened with the knowledge? Obviously, the numbers of people doing the knowledge pre-pandemic declined massively, because what's the point in doing the knowledge to be a cab driver when we were doing so poorly? And during the pandemic, who was going to do the knowledge to be unemployed? So nobody signed up to the knowledge. What we've seen subsequently, post-pandemic, is a massive explosion in people doing the knowledge.
Oh, interesting. How do they do it now?
It's still pretty much the traditional way. You can either
on a moped. I don't see guys on the moped much.
You don't see many of them. What happens now? We've got more women doing it now. They tend to do it in the early hours in smart cars and stuff like that. We've got a lot of people now do it on push bikes. These electric push bikes. Yeah. There's a guy at the moment doing it. He's doing it on the bus. He's got a bus ticket or a bus card, and he gets all the bus routes and he walks it and does the bus routes, and that's quite popular. And what we're seeing now is we're getting a much younger demographic doing it. I mean, we've got several people at the moment who have passed the knowledge but can't get a license because they're not 21. You've got to be 21 to get a taxi license. And we had a guy just before Christmas got a license. He was 70. He retired from his previous job and did the knowledge, and he's just got a cab license. And so we're seeing more and more women doing it. And the one thing about taxis in London is people talk about constantly, about representation. And the only thing that where we're lacking is we still haven't got enough women driving cabs. And it's a great job for anyone, but it's a particularly good job for the
You
prime.
could fit it in with kids.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
And I mean, women tend to be the primary child carers, and it works well. So we're still underrepresented in that. But the thing that always makes us laugh is when you see the police and the fire brigade and local authorities and people doing this, positive recruitment, trying to get a more London demographic working for them. People, they say underrepresented people. If you go down to the Knowledge Centre in Greenwich, and I was down there last week, and you go and sit in the waiting room for people being tested, it is a cross section of London to a T. When I did the knowledge 40 odd years ago, most people look like me.
Right.
Now most people don't look like me.
Do you get Uber? I mean, what's the advantage? Do you get Uber drivers kind of then deciding to do the knowledge? Is there an advantage? And why? What is that?
There's a massive number of private hire drivers do the knowledge.
Why? What's in it for them?
Well, because if you work for one of the private hire firms, Bolt, Uber, any of those, you have to work all the hours God sends. You're totally dependent on them. You're susceptible to however much they want to charge you, their percentages, and you're not to put too part of it, many argue, and I would agree that they're exploited. You become a taxi driver, you work for yourself, solely for yourself. You work the hours you want that suit you, not when someone tells you to come to work. You've got the flexibility, and the great thing about driving a cab is the flexibility. If you don't want to go to work today, you don't. If you're going on holiday next week, you work 7 days a week. It's the most flexible job in the world. And so we're seeing a massive number of former private hire drivers now doing the knowledge, and they're the big source of recruitment, to be fair.
And you're saying that the use of cabs is definitely going up. That people are jumping on black cabs, despite the fact that you can. I mean, I have used Uber a few times, but I would prefer a black cab. Just sometimes it's just much easier to get Uber. But
so what we're seeing now is we've obviously got apps. We've got a plethora of black cab apps. There's taxi app. There's Free Now. There's Get. There's one called Jump that's very big. There's one that's just launched called Unify. And so we've got lots of customers with those sort of base. Big ones still Computer Cab. But what we're seeing now is, to be totally honest with you, Uber did us a favour, right? And
that's an interesting take.
They absolutely did, because there's a whole generation of people now who have never got the night bus home, who have very rarely got on a bus, a whole younger demographic.
Yeah.
They used to, to use their term, they used to Uber it. They used to get a private.
My kids do.
Yeah. That's what they all used to do. And a lot of them still do. And when Uber's prices started to cut, they then all went to Bolt, when Bolt first launched, and now they flirt between the various ones there are around. But what a lot of them have now realised is that they're in central London and they're going somewhere else in central London, or they're going to the railway station or whatever. There's 4 or 5 of them on the street, or 2 or 3 of them on the street. They can stop a cab on the street. They can get in a black cab. Firstly, the guy can use the bus lanes, or the girl knows where they're going. They've quickly worked out that the price is not a lot different. In some cases, it's cheaper. Every cab in London now takes contactless cards. There's a machine in the back.
That's part of the regulation.
Yeah, of course it is. And they can touch your phone, a card, a watch. Someone tells me that there's now kids paying on rings. I don't quite know how you pay on a ring. Apparently you can get a ring. And they touch the card machine in the back and they go. They're off. And cab drivers call it tap and run, because literally they tap it and they're gone. And the real bit that we can't grasp is it's the younger demographic that go the shortest distances.
Right.
Now, I wouldn't get a cab from here to London Bridge, but the young people do.
For our listeners, we're about 8 minutes walk away from London Bridge.
Sorry, yeah, we're very close. And so that's what they do. And they've realised it. And so now black cabs have now come back. We've seen a demographic that we never thought we'd get back, this younger demographic. Really interesting, we've got them back. And increasingly, that younger demographic is predominantly made up of women, younger women. Their
Do you
parents,
think they feel safe with a black cab?
yeah, obviously they feel safe. They get the cab off the street. They can get a cab on an app, and what their parents will tell them is, if you're out at night, get a cab. And quite a lot of the times now, you'll pick up a young girl who's on these apps, and it will be on, mum or dad's credit card
Right.
is on the app. And, I don't know what the current term amongst young kids is, but I think they milk it, to be honest, because you'll pick up a young girl, she goes and picks up 2 or 3 of her friends, you'll go to the cinema, you'll drop them at the cinema, and then they'll all get a cab home, courtesy of mum or dad's credit card. Mum or dad justify it because they're safe,
Right.
and we justify it because it's good for us.
Interesting. So then the big question: are you going to be put out of business by robotaxis?
No, we are not. Look, this great thing about robotaxis. Well, firstly, in London, they won't be taxis. That's a marketing term. Taxis, as you know, are funny black vehicles with a sign on the front that says taxi.
Right.
What there will be at some time, there will be robo-driven private hire cars.
Yeah.
I would argue that no matter how bad they are, they've probably got to be better than most Uber drivers. So they'd probably be safer.
Careful, Steve.
But yeah, no, but look, so and they tell you that they're going to launch this year and everything's going to be fine and dandy. What they don't tell you, I mean, let me give you an example. Yeah, I've got at home, I've got a robot Hoover, and if anyone hasn't got one, by the way, they're brilliant. It comes out, they're only £200. It comes out, it hoovers your house, goes back in and empties itself. And you set it to come out and it comes out, does it? On the strength of having bought one of those about 8 years ago, I've now got a robot a robot lawnmower.
Right.
And again, anyone not listening, absolutely incredible. You put it in your garden, it comes out every day, you program it, cuts the grass, goes back. You never, ever have to cut the grass again. And they're about...
You don't have to ask it.
No, you can program it to come out.
And it costs?
£400.
Right.
And probably the price of a decent lawnmower.
Right.
And it comes out and it cuts the edge. And because it cuts it every day, you have no dead grass. Absolutely brilliant. And almost everybody who comes around my house, without exception, goes, oh, you've got a robot Hoover and you've got a robot lawnmower.
So you get a robotaxi.
And they haven't got one. And why haven't they got one? Because they don't trust a robot Hoover to hoover their house.
Oh.
They don't trust a robot, at least it's not new technology, these things have been out for years. And they don't trust a robot lawnmower to cut their grass, but they're going to put their kids in a robot car. Not so sure that there's an argument that robo cars or robo private hire vehicles are a solution looking for a problem. Because I don't see what their solution.
No, I've argued that in the stuff I've written. I wrote a piece for the Telegraph the other day about it. What is the problem that they're trying to solve?
But the solution, the problem they're trying to solve, the private hire companies, is their biggest expense is the driver.
Right.
If they can rule the driver out, then obviously there's
But the economics might not quite work because you might pay the driver 40 grand a year or whatever.
Well, that
But they're 30 maybe, but that extra cost of all the equipment and the surveillance and owning the car doesn't make sense to me.
None of it makes sense to anyone who's looked into it. The technology companies, you can see why they're pushing it. They've got the look. Let me. Most people think that what's going to happen with these robot cars is you're going to wind them up on a Monday morning. You're going to send them out onto the streets. They're going to pick people up, take them where they want to go. And at night, they're going to come back home, charge themselves, and then go out again the next morning or the next evening. Well, that's not how it works. So firstly, let's forget about all the human interaction issues, like who's going to clean the car, lost property, all the things that can go wrong with the vehicle, punches and God knows what. Forget all of that, which is going to take human interaction. What they don't tell you, and Waymo in San Francisco, and San Francisco is their most successful trial, is at the moment they've got it down to 7 cars per controller.
Oh, you found that out? I've always been trying to find that out.
7 cars
you know that
per controller.
Oh, right. So they've got 1/7 of a driver.
1/7 of a driver in each car.
Right.
They reckon that is probably the lowest it will ever get. And up until recently, they were running at 1 in 12, 1 in 10, 1 in 12, and they got it down to 1 in 7. And there's people are saying that's not working. So when they first get launched in London, presuming somebody signs them off, now whether Heidi Alexander, who seems to be a massive proponent for these things for reasons I don't understand.
Don't understand why, but anyway.
And I know Heidi quite well from when she was the deputy mayor for transport in London, and she's no fool.
Yeah.
But why she would suddenly hitch her flag to this mast, I really don't know. So presuming that somebody is brave enough to sign them off to go out on the streets on their own, presuming that's going to happen, and I'm not so sure. It's just
No, they're going to have safety drivers to start.
Oh, initially, yeah, no, I'm talking about who's going to sign it off without the safety driver. Like, and so when they first launch, there's going to be one controller, probably for 5 cars, 3 cars, and they might get it up to 7 or 10. But again, it's very, I mean, Waymo 1 in 7 at the moment, whether they can get it up to 1 in 10. So they're going to launch it with probably one controller for, probably in London, one controller per car. So even though you think you're in a driverless car, someone's sitting in the control, and then they will increase it. And what the big issue with these cars is, by virtue of they have to be, they're very cautious, they're very safety conscious because they have to be. Quite how that's going to work in a city like London, no one has explained.
I have written a lot about this. I've devised something called the Holborn problem, which, you know, Holborn at 6 o'clock in the evening is like teeming with people, kind of, you know, overflowing off the pavements. A driver's car is never going to be able to get through because we jaywalk.
Yep.
Because we don't have a concept of jaywalking. We jaywalk on the time.
Yeah, I mean, and you mentioned Holborn. I mean, there's a pedestrian crossing around the back of King's Cross Station that links the goods yard at the back, the trendy new part.
Oh yeah,
with the station.
Yeah, I know
and
that, yeah.
the only way you can drive to get across that crossing is eventually you have to sort of push your way across. Not dangerously, but you have to.
I know that crossing well. It's at the top of the bridge.
That's it. You have to do that because you would not get across. If you followed the rules of the road to the letter, you'd be sat there. So unless the controller takes control of that car and starts to drive it across that crossing, it's never going to move. It's going to sit there. And then you throw in all the other bits and pieces. Like, I mean, apparently in San Francisco, it's quite a thing now. The kids will put a cone in front of the car because the car then doesn't move. And there's all you've seen the videos of them crashing into each other and going,
Yeah.
But the bit I really don't very quickly, drivers in London are going to click on, because London is such a congested city. I'm waiting to pull out of a side street onto the Cromwell Road, you know, on the road to the airport, major road to the airport. And I'm on a side street waiting to pull out. And at the moment, and anybody who drives listening to this can envisage, you look to the right and you're trying to make eye contact with a driver who's going to flash you or wave at you and let you out. You're desperately looking for someone to let you out. When you see a Waymo car come in, you're very quickly going to realise you can just pull out because it's going to stop.
Right.
And it's not going to, and it's then not going to bid the hooter and chase you up the road waving a machete. It's going to stop and let you out.
I hadn't thought of that one. Yeah.
And the other thing you then realise, and you see this constantly in London, is people will come down the inside or the outside and try to jib in, I think is the term. And depending who you are, how confident you are and what car you're driving, when everybody sees a Waymo car in the traffic, it's going to stop and let the whole world pull in front of it because that's what it's designed to do. So I think the flaw in these, other than the fact that they're not wanted or needed, as certainly not as taxis or private hire vehicles, I don't understand how they're going to interact with London and people. This is the bit I don't think that they're quite ready for.
Can I just press you on the point about Heidi Alexander, because I have no understanding of why she is so in hock to this. The only thing I can think of is that it's part of the wider thing about not kind of trying to antagonize the tech bros and Trump by kind of restricting Waymo here. But I don't know. That's my theory, but I don't know what yours might be.
No, I think you're probably right. I think obviously the government's very keen on getting tech companies here. The top 10 companies in the world, as you know, American companies are all tech companies.
Yeah.
You know, even they're all Nvidia and all the massive returns and all of that. So obviously she wants to encourage the tech companies to come here, and of course she should do. That's right. But I just. I can understand why she'd want Google here. You know, she would want Apple here. She would want Microsoft here. I get that, but I just look. If you're saying to me that there's a use for these driverless cars, I think there is, and I'll tell you what I think that use is. Around the country, there are people of probably a similar age to us who at some time, as an example, I've had a car since I was 17. I don't use it in London, but I've had it, most people listen to this, certainly people who live rurally or in more suburban areas will have had a car, will be dependent on that car. They'll go to the supermarket in it, they'll visit people, go to the doctors, whatever. There comes a time in life when you're of an age where you realise you can't drive. It's happening at the moment to my father-in-law. I'm beginning to realise that perhaps now, we've had the conversation, perhaps we ought to say, you ought not to drive anymore. There's going to come a time where those people who have had a car their whole life do not want to lose that independence. They really don't want to give up that car. They're almost forced to. I mean, on many occasions, the police literally report them to the DVLA and stuff like that. There will come a time when those people will be able to buy a car that sits on their drive. They get in it, it takes them where they want to go and brings them home again and takes them to this.
Very interesting, but that's not a taxi.
That is not a taxi.
They would own it. But there's never any suggestion by Waymo so far, or any of the other companies, that you'd be able to buy a driverless car.
Well, that's where it's coming. That's where it's going to go. Why would you? And there you can see you've got the purpose for the car. Most modern cars now have got this stage 3 automation. I've got one.
Yeah,
you can take your hands off, and it's only
and it can change lane and it can brake automatically.
Yeah, and they've all got that.
Valid.
They've got the LiDAR.
They haven't got 4 or 5.
No. But there will come a time when that happens, and I can see a use for it. That I think there's going to be a massive market for that.
Right.
But why is there a market at the moment? I got a cab. I've been somewhere this morning. I had to get a cab back here in the rain. I get in the cab. I tell the guy where I'm going. We had a conversation about something. What is the advantage to me in getting in a driverless car other than cost? And I don't think that cost advantage will be there. And then halfway through the journey, I get a phone call and I've got to change my destination.
Right.
Have I got to open the app? How does it work? How do I change it? Can the car... And the other thing they don't explain to you, we were talking earlier, what the car's going to do. So let's just presume that London is full of these things and they're all working as they say they're going to. So I get my Robo private hire vehicle today that's come here, and now it's 11 o'clock in the morning. London's quiet. There's not many people moving around. What does that car do then? It hasn't got another job to go to. If it did, it would go there. It hasn't got another job to do. Does it now trundle across London Bridge looking for a job like a taxi driver would do? Does it find somewhere to park? How does it know where it can park?
And it adds to congestion.
And if it's driving around, it's added to congestion. It's got to find out there is nowhere. Anyone who's ever visited central London, there is nowhere to park, right? There's nowhere. Even as a cab driver, there's nowhere to park. Where are these things going to stop? So if you can't stop, it's got to keep driving. It's added to congestion. I'm really honestly, if you're saying to me, you started this thing by asking me, am I worried? Am I nervous? And the answer is no, I'm absolutely not. Now, whether that would be the same answer if I was still here in 20 or 30 years' time, which I probably won't be, would be a very different conversation. But I just don't think there's the market for it. I don't think people want it. The people who, as I said to you, don't trust my robot Hoover are going to trust a robot car over a taxi. Don't think so.
Well, thank you, Steve. That's a great place to end. And I must say, I agree with most of that, but it's very good to hear from you and to realise that black cabs are going to be around for a long time, because I've seen them all my life. So thanks a lot, Steve. Cheers.
Christian, I thought that was a really interesting excursion into the taxi and private hire sectors which really don't get enough attention when it comes to policy discussions and media coverage. But I thought Steve's remarks were especially interesting in relation to autonomous vehicles, and the fact that Steve is not kind of ideologically opposed to the idea that such a thing can exist, an autonomous vehicle, a self-driving car, and even said there could be uses for these things in the future that would be of value to society. But he was very sceptical, in fact, devastatingly so, on their potential use as private hire vehicles in Greater London.
Yes, I thought it was a great interview for that reason, that he suggested this thing about, if your elderly parents are living in a rural area and they can't drive any longer, that's when a driverless car would be useful. But there is, of course, no such model for this. All the driverless car companies have focused on this robotaxi, which he rightly says is robo-private hire, because taxis are black cabs in Britain. And they haven't at all considered the idea of individuals buying these cars. And when the protagonists of these vehicles kind of go on about them, they never kind of make the point that these things will be really expensive, like that, the amount of computing programming they have to have on the amount of software. They use a lot of energy in just computing all the data they get and so on. And none of this is ever mentioned, but there aren't any estimates of this. But I reckon from things that I've seen that these cars are costing between $250,000 million each. And, that's, more than a Rolls Royce.
Well, indeed. And now you listeners may have come across an article that you wrote in the Daily Telegraph recently on this subject, where you were especially scathing about the position of our UK Transport Secretary.
I'm afraid I was, Mark. And, as an old Labour man, it hurts me to be critical of the government yet again. But I'm amazed, as Steve McNamara pointed out, that Heidi Alexander, the Transport Secretary, has really, as an expression you and I like, drank the Kool-Aid over this issue. That really she seems to think there are enormous benefits, and as you're going to explain later, they're making special provision for this. And I'm at a loss to understand, with all the transport problems and issues and considerations we have, why are they so interested in this? And the only reasons I postulated on the interview is that just possibly they want to kind of satisfy the tech bros and and President Trump, indeed, that they're not kind of interfering with these wonderful companies. Indeed, they're encouraging them. But it's very dispiriting, Mark, because there's so many other issues we could kind of be devoting energy to, and all they're doing is kind of looking at this kind of impossible technology.
Well, we're going to turn now to look at the road safety strategy that was published by the UK government earlier in January. And I think it resonates with what you're just saying, Christian, because there's an interesting feature in this strategy when it comes to autonomous private hire vehicles, which I'll come back to. But perhaps I should just say, first of all, that this road safety strategy has been a long time in gestation. And it's, as so often with these kind of things, when they're published by governments, it runs to over 50 pages. So it makes it fairly heavy going to work your way through and understand what's being said and what the significance is. There are.
I think you ruined your Sunday doing it.
I did. For our listeners, I gave up my Sunday afternoon to read through this, but it's a small price to pay. But there are 4 themes in the document. The first theme is characterized as supporting road users. And that's interesting use of vocabulary in itself, because this government has been at pains since it was elected to refute allegations from the Conservatives and Reform that it has a tendency to wage war on the motorists. And in fact, in many respects, nothing could be further from the truth. But they do sort of overcompensate when it comes to the idea that they are supportive of road users. The second theme is taking advantage of technology, data and innovation for safer vehicles and post-collision care. And that includes some interesting innovations. So listeners will be familiar probably with the existence of the Air Accident Investigation Branch, which, as the name implies, looks at aviation incidents. And there is a rail industry investigation service now that you'll recall, Christian, was created in the wake of those accidents at the turn of the century. This document proposes to create a road safety investigation branch, which, if you think about it, is quite a good idea, because we, as the document itself points out, we tend to accept road accidents as a bit of a given, and that the level of casualties on the roads, incidents, accidents, deaths and injuries is somehow a normal part of life, whereas we don't accept that with other transport modes such as rail and air, tramways, buses and so on. So there is an attempt, I think, to try to regularize that position and learn from road traffic incidents and accidents.
Absolutely. Look, this is an idea that when I ran to get the Labour nomination for mayor, I said that in London 10 years ago, I said precisely this, that the mayor ought to set up a road investigation unit that would look at every fatal accident or every serious accident and learn the lessons from it. So this is long overdue, Mark. I mean, it seems to be a no-brainer. I mean, it wouldn't cost a vast amount, and obviously they're not going to look at kind of little smashes where people bump into each other on a suburban road at 10 miles an hour. But they ought to look at every fatal crash and ought to produce a report as to what caused that and what changes could be made to avoid it. It's a no-brainer.
There's also then a third theme, which is ensuring infrastructure is safe, which deals with, as the name implies, the design and organisation of the road network and speed limits and so on. Though it's interesting that there isn't, as might have been suggested by conservative and reform critics, that any sort of attempt to introduce much lower general speed limits across the network. And then the fourth theme is robust enforcement, which I think many listeners will agree that it's no point in actually passing laws on road safety and driver and road user behaviour if you don't actually enforce them properly. And this is where there's been some of the sort of mainstream media coverage around issues such as the drink drive alcohol limits being amended. And I think the other media coverage that was largely in the mainstream was around different ages of drivers, requiring young drivers, new drivers, to have a longer period of learning, and older drivers to be subject to more health checks, particularly eyesight tests, to make sure that they're safe to be on the road.
But this is rather a timid document, isn't it? It hasn't really taken on the vested interests of the motoring lobby and said, well, you're really going to have to rein back on your behaviour. And
yeah, I think I've got a little bit of statistical analysis here, because when I went through the document, I counted 34 proposals or recommendations in the entirety of the 50-odd pages. But interestingly, the verb for 20 of them, so the sort of government action that was usually consult, explore, consider, review, examine, publish. There was very little when it came to immediate change. And I think that that's something which is more than a little puzzling for a government that was elected on a promise with a single word pledge to the nation, really, of change. And yet so many of these reforms might not see the light of day until towards the back end, at least, of this parliament. And it seems to me that a government that at least has the possibility of turning into a one-term administration based on the current opinion polls might be moving a little bit faster if it wanted to leave a real legacy. But the interesting variant on that, which refers back to some of the things we've been discussing earlier, is there is a commitment to legislate very precisely in spring of 2026 to ensure that the autonomous vehicle rollout can take place. And I just want to read for listeners the relevant section from the document. So it says the government is accelerating automated passenger services legislation to spring 2026 to help facilitate pilots of commercial self-driving passenger services with no safety driver. Safety is at the heart of the piloting scheme. The pilots will help build understanding of the safety benefits that this technology can bring and inform the regulatory framework. So that to me is an astonishing choice of priority.
No, absolutely. I mean, the last government failed to legislate on a lot of this stuff, but they did ensure there was legislation about pedicabs. And that was because any of you who visit the Houses of Parliament know that there's a lot of pedicabs hanging around there. And so that was the priority of the MPs, that they had to do something about these blasted pedicabs, which actually exist probably almost nowhere else in the country. I'd say extraordinary priority to give autonomous cars, special legislation, particularly as one of the ones that I had hoped they might look at, which I wrote a Substack about kind of just at the back end of last year, was SUVs, special utility vehicles, which have a much higher rate of killing children and indeed adults when they collide with them than normal cars. And that's a road safety issue, but there's no mention of that, I don't think, in any of this.
No, I could. There is one of the things they're going to look at. I can't remember which of those verbs it is, but I think it was examine. It didn't even go as far as consult. Is on why cars are getting bigger. So they're sort of going to have a chat with people in the industry and the manufacturers on why cars are getting bigger. But there's no. I know it's
I can tell them that cars are getting bigger because people think they're safer for the occupants, so they don't give a damn about people outside. But I mean, that's a bit too difficult.
Which feeds very much into a related issue, because I think it was the day after the road safety strategy was published when people said, commentators said, well, where's the pavement parking policy then that you've also promised us? Well, that
and this did. Yeah, to your heart, Mark. I know
it is. I'm a bit rabid on this, but it's it came out. I think it was the next day. There was a statement on pavement parking, and this has been long awaited because the consultation on this actually took place under the previous administration. And what they've said is that the government has said for England, this is that they will toughen up the powers of local authorities to designate areas for bans on pavement parking more easily and over wider geographical areas than just individual streets. But it's still going to be very much left down to local authorities to take the local political hit and deal with the local political risk of these things, rather than having what actually you have in London, which is a default policy of no pavement parking. Because in Greater London, you can't park on the pavement.
Except if there's special...
Unless there's an exemption.
Yeah.
The recommendation from the House of Commons Transport Committee, as I recall, was to have that model extended to the rest of England. But in fact, what we're having instead is a bit more power for local authorities to designate areas, and that's not doesn't really send. We sometimes hear about sort of nudge politics. That governments need to signal through nudges the direction of travel, and sometimes pretty forceful nudges, like you must wear a seatbelt and you must wear a helmet if you're using a motorcycle or a moped. And with this, it's not even a nudge, really. It's a sort of gentle brush by, and I think that's a missed opportunity and a real shame for pedestrians and other.
I can't see many reform local authorities legislating to stop pavement parking.
No, it doesn't seem likely to be high on their list of priorities, does it?
No, another missed opportunity.
So I think so, and so I think it's an illustration, really, of the, coming back to what we said at the beginning, a timidity based around not upsetting motorists, and seeing motorists as a sort of a class of citizen of them on their own, of distinct and singular and great importance, rather than as part of a kind of community of users of road and pavement space, and also, failing to recognize the fact that many road users, or most road users at various times, are also pedestrians. They're also people who have pavements outside their homes. There many cases they've got children who need to walk to school, and so on. But seeing this road user lobby as incredibly powerful and to be feared. Here's Christian's final thought from the Departure Lounge.
Well, here's a slightly odd one. Apparently, the Bakerloo line and possibly also Waterloo Station are going to have their two last letters separated and made into zeros. So they're the Baker L00 line and Water L00. And that's to promote Heineken's zero beer. Zero beer is becoming zero alcohol beer is becoming amazingly popular, and is being dispensed in lots of pubs straight out of the tap and stuff. So it's quite extraordinary. And Heineken are taking advantage of this odd names that these lines have and the station has to promote their wares. And some people object to this and say, oh, it's going to be confusing for tourists, or it's going to be difficult. And I must say, I think it's a bit of fun. I think it's quite clever. And I think that it doesn't do the underground any harm. And indeed, if it raises some money to help keep fares down, well, so be it.
Calling All Stations, the Transport Podcast with Christian Walmart, is produced by Cogitamus Limited, a leading provider of public affairs consultancy services in the sector. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you have, please consider giving us a 5-star rating with whichever platform you use. Do follow us on social media channels, including Blue Sky, Facebook, and X, formerly known as Twitter. Our handle on X is @AllStationsPod.